And we're back on this very special edition of the Conservative Five for LibertyNation.com. Obviously, there's only three of us. That's why it's such a special edition, because our guests are the most special of all, Mr. Tim Donner and Dave Patterson.
Can I break in
Please.
to say that makes each of us worth not one person, but 1 2/3 of
like Chevy Chase in Caddyshack. How do you judge yourself by other people? Height. So
we're each 1 2/3 of a person. That's how impressive we all are.
That's fairly impressive,
and very humble too.
Absolutely.
Or as Chris Christie might say, in quoting Stephen Wright, "I'm not afraid of heights. I'm afraid of widths."
Okay, so we've been talking about Joe Biden's response to the Ukraine war. We've been talking about the international response. And how this really fits into a broader foreign policy debacle. But for this last segment, what I really want to talk about, chaps, is a question that's bothered me pretty much since the beginning, and that is, can Ukraine win this war? And Dave, I know you and I have talked about this on Liberty Nation Radio before, but it's my contention that, and I could be entirely wrong, but that they really never could win this war by themselves, which is obviously why the NATO push behind it has been such a bulwark for them. But in reality, Russia is a beatable foe. It's lost, even in the last 100 years, it's been involved in a lot of conflicts that it's lost, more, I think 20 conflicts or 19 conflicts, where it hasn't been successful. So it is a beatable foe, but Russia has historically never really committed itself until it's thrown 500,000 lives at a war effort. And by any figures, even the admittedly inflated Ukrainian figures, which is where we're getting our figures from, they're nowhere near 500,000 lives yet. So to me, it seems that Russia hasn't really even committed fully to taking the provinces of Ukraine, the Donbass regions and Crimea. It seems as though, because if they really wanted to just go full out war, they'd start unleashing rocket barrages of huge bombs just at civilian populations, because it's a war, and they do it. And Ukraine is, as we pointed out in the last segment, is outside of NATO, so it'd be Ukraine against Russia. And that doesn't appear to me to be what Russia wants at the moment. Now, they might do that, but it seems to me that they're not even fully committed to winning yet. And already Ukraine's on the brink of not being able to fight.
I think that I would make 3 points. And the first is, no one has established a definition of what winning means.
Yes.
And until you do that, you're just helpless in using any kind of weaponry or tactics. So you have to understand what winning means. Now, in wars in the past, winning has been two things, really. And that is that either you trounce, completely destroy the war-making and economy of your enemy, as was the case in World War II, or you make it so ugly for the opponent that they give up and go away, as the North Vietnamese did to the United States in the Vietnam War. And so those are the kind of the three things you need to think about. And so in defining winning, one might say, okay, look, you guys are just going to beat the crap out of each other until neither of you has any strength left, and Putin has indicated that he is not going to give up no matter what, and Ukraine, at the rate they're going, will have to give up because they don't have anybody left to throw into the battle. So it appears to me that a reasonable solution is that you broker a sit down where Putin says, okay, I can't lose face. I've wasted all these Russian young people in this war. I can't lose face. Okay, so what is it that they would absolutely draw a line on? Crimea would be one. Crimea has always been Russian, and okay, fine, you get Crimea. Donbass and Luhansk, on the other hand, not so much. I mean, you made a play on April 14th or in April of 2014. You got a significant swath of the Donbass and Luhansk Oblast. Okay, fine. But what we're going to do there is we're going to have that administered by some third party, or you get what you were back when you started on February 24th. And the quid for Ukraine is they're immediately in NATO. So is that the right one? Who knows? But it's something. It's a starting.
It's a definition of winning, yeah.
It's a definition of winning. And right now, the Biden administration is hopelessly intellectually feeble in coming up with anything like that.
Sometimes winning from a political standpoint is simply declaring victory. Declaring that you won and leaving. Now, of course, you can't really do that in Korea. We couldn't do it in Vietnam. This one has kind of the feel of the Iran-Iraq war, in which the United States had a very difficult time deciding which side they would take in a war between two enemies of the United States. Now, of course, we don't have, Ukraine's not an enemy, and Russia is an adversary more than an enemy at this point in time. But a lot of this, I think, depends on the Russians' will to continue to fight through this long, dark, cold winter that is on the horizon very shortly. Do the Russians have the will to fight? Well, I thought that, honestly, that the sight of all the body bags coming back from Ukraine would turn Russian support for this war way down, that they would turn against this war, even if privately, because, of course, you don't attack Vladimir Putin publicly, or you find yourself in a great state of disrepair, if not dead. So it seemed that the Russian people would, in some sense, not only because of all the body bags, but because of the incredible investment of treasure by the Russian leadership, that they would turn against this war and eventually force Russia to pull back, that the economy would be so strapped because of this all-out war on its neighbor. But in fact, incredibly, it turns out that the Russian economy, while it wavered badly at first, has recovered. The economy has recovered, and the irony is that since Russia's invasion, Russian oligarchs have been prohibited from investing in many foreign vehicles. So what's happened is these Russian oligarchs have been forced to invest domestically, and that has boosted the Russian economy, ironically, in wartime. And I think it signals to Putin, it doesn't seem that any sort of domestic opposition to it will stand in your way.
Yeah, notably the pressures that the international community have put on Russia, because they were, like Dave pointed out in the first segment that we talked about, it was a very piecemeal approach to the sanctions. It allowed Vladimir Putin to build relationships, for example, with China. So
let's put something
everybody's paying Russia.
Let's put something in context too, in terms of Joe Biden, who's been around Washington for 50 years, his entire adult life. He has been a member, and a prominent member for many of those, of the swamp. Lest we forget, he was the only one of the brain trust, so to speak, of the Obama administration that opposed the raid to kill Osama bin Laden. Obama was for it. Hillary Clinton was for it. Everybody was for it except Joe Biden. So it shows that he's 1, weak, 2, cowardly, 3, wrong, or 4, all of the above. And for Democrats, 5, none of the above, because he has to beat Donald Trump in 2024.
And we're almost out of time now, gentlemen. But what I'd really like to do is just hand this over to Dave for the final summation with what I think is probably the most important question in terms of lives and treasure, as it were. And that's, Dave, when and how does this war end?
I think that the war ends when the American people decide that it's over. Enough is enough, and we're not giving another dime to support what's going on, regardless of whether it's worthwhile or not. The United States has a capacity to say, I'm stopping. They did it in Vietnam in 1975. Congress said not another dime goes to Vietnam, and they made it stick. And there is this underlying philosophical and emotional drive in America that simply says enough is enough, and we're not giving another dime. That's the more troubling end to it, because and we've done it before. We did it, golly, we did it in Afghanistan, didn't we? Just recently, we just left. We pulled out of Bagram and left with no electricity. We just pulled out in the middle of the night, leaving the Afghan security forces to fend for themselves, which of course they couldn't. And so we have a history of doing this. That's one way that this all ends, unfortunately. The second way, of course, is that should an adult get into the White House next, and they simply force the negotiation. If we're indeed the powerhouse superpower that we think we are, and we enjoy meddling in other people's businesses, we force the negotiation, period. NATO comes on board, we show leadership, and it's a negotiated settlement, regardless of how it sorts out.
Dave, as I'm sure Napoleon, Caesar, and all the rest would agree, leadership is what wins battles. David J. Patterson and Tim Donner, thank you ever so much for joining us on this special edition of the Conservative 5, cut down to 3 because apparently we're worth 1 2/3 each, which is quite nice. I've been your host, Mark Angelides. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Mark.
Thanks, Mark.